developing a crowdsourcing site. So she's going to tell you about what she's done. I just wanted to mention briefly about the Directorate Fellows Program. This is a new program with the Fish and Wildlife Service. This is the second year of the program. And it's an effort by the service to directly recruit sharp, sort of late in their undergraduate career students and graduate students into the service, and it starts with them having a fellowship with a program. So we had to write a proposal, and it was competitive with some other proposals, and we got one of these fellowships, and then there was an application process. We had a lot of applicants, and Shani was selected out of that group to work on this project. So so she's going to tell you about this crowdsourcing project. The other thing I want to say, but two things. One is she isn't a bird person, so give her a little bit of a break. She's learned a lot about birds in the last 11 weeks, but she's not an avian ecologist. The other thing is that this project was something that I was kind of got the idea for a couple years ago, and talked to folks like Tim Jones and with the ACJV, and Tim Bowman with the Sea Duck Joint Venture, and someone that Shani will introduce in her talk, John Pickering with the University of Georgia. We kind of put this team together. We're working with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, Don Craigie and Joe Evenson. So we kind of had this group together. We had this idea. We wrote a proposal. We were thinking about this, and we just, we had some photos. We got photos to pick, but it was just sort of waiting to start. And Shani's arrival has really kick-started this in a really big way. So we're super pleased that she was here and how much we've accomplished this summer. And I bring that up it really has been helpful to have her here, and also just to indicate that this is really the start of this project. So she's done some good work in getting us moving, and hopefully when she moves on, we'll still have some momentum to keep this going and come back in a year or so and show you like a really finished project. So anyway, Shani.
Thanks. Okay, thank you all for being here, and I can't say enough about how amazing it's been to have this opportunity to work at the Fish and Wildlife Service and working with Emily, so I'm just going to say I could go on forever, but we don't have time, so I will go ahead and just jump right in. As Emily said, I was taken on to work on a crowdsourcing approach to the photo survey analysis of North America's waterbirds. And probably a lot of you are already familiar with them, but I'll just go over the aerial photo survey process, and then an intro to crowdsourcing in general, best practices in crowdsourcing, and then go into our project design and sort of how we decided to solve some of the problems that we were foreseeing, and then a demo of the website in its early stages, and then some of the results of the beta test that we rolled out when we got the website going, and then finally future steps. Oh no, okay. Okay, so the aerial waterbird surveys in the past and present fly observer biologists over the ocean to count and ID all of the bird species that they observe. And there's obviously some stressful and difficult problems with their job, because the birds are flying all over the place, and they have to make quick estimates of the numbers of birds and make sure that they don't miss any. And so now that camera technology has been advancing, we're finally at the point where we can actually take high-resolution photos from the distance of the plane to the ocean that have enough information to be of value. And so we've been partnering with some surveys that have started running both observers and cameras in the surveys. And they have 2 observers as well as 2 cameras, one camera facing forward and one camera facing in the same direction as the observers. And so these 2 are the PSAMP project and the AMAPS project. The forward-facing camera, as you can see up there, is a new addition as well. It's especially interesting because what its purpose is to see the bird populations before the plane reaches them. So we can get an idea of whether the observers, when they're looking out that side window, are really seeing everything that was there, or if they're missing things because of the disturbance of the plane sound scattering the birds. So the front-facing camera is going to be important as we go forward, and then the front observer is here in this window, and then the rear observer is looking down at the same area from the second window, and then the point of view camera will be taking pictures of exactly the area that they're observing. And then you can see here, this photo is a bit low on resolution, but you can get the idea that the front-facing camera is going to see this field of view in yellow, and then as the plane progresses forward, the birds are going to pass gradually into the red area where they'll be seen by the observers and the point of view camera. So we're getting multiple angles on the same birds, hopefully. This is an example of the point of view camera. You can see the plane over here on the right. And then this is an example of a front-facing photo. And this is the type of photo that we started launching with our website. We uploaded these photos first because they tend to be a little more attractive. Over here are the lines. These are transect lines running along the left and the bottom of the screen. And so that shows the line that the plane has been flying in and that the observers were seeing. So we're really only interested in the birds that are really in the middle part. And then furthermore, because the birds are going to be passing through from the upper right-hand corner to the lower left-hand corner, we only really become interested in them as far when they reach around this line here that's going across horizontally. So I don't know if you all can see, but right there is a group of 4 birds. And this is what we're dealing with our photos as we show them on the website. They're at about this resolution, and so people really need to lean forward and spot these tiny specks. But if you zoom in, you can see that they are in fact birds, and so that's the maximum resolution that we have. This is an example just to show how objects move from the upper right-hand corner down to the bottom left as the plane moves forward. These are just 2 buoys, and I'm just progressing chronologically through the photos. You can see that one of our issues is going to be that we have multiple photos of the same birds. And in fact, that from one buoy to get from the upper right to the lower left took about 13 photos. So it's present in 13 photos, so that's good because potentially we could actually maybe look at every 13 photos or every 10 photos as a way of eliminating repeats, but that's something we really have to figure out going forward, and I'll talk about that more later. The goals for the photo detection study are not to replace the observers at all, but to enhance and correct the aerial observer data by analyzing the corresponding aerial photographs and to get accurate counts and species IDs. So obviously when things are moving so quickly for the observers, they have to take estimates of large flocks, but if we can take that moment in time with a photograph and stop and actually count every single bird, we have the ability to make corrections and to perfect that data, hopefully. Secondly, we want to provide informative data to aid in conservation efforts of species of concern. So that's the ultimate goal. And then third, what we're working on directly is creating a working infrastructure for future photo surveys. So hopefully, once we get these websites up and running, every new survey that comes through, we could just upload the photos and the system would already be in place to generate the data really quickly and to get through all the photos. So the challenge with adding, with the photo surveys is that each survey generates hundreds and thousands of photos. They're taking multiple photos per second, and we have the 2 cameras going, and it takes thousands of man-hours to process them. So the question is, how can we tackle this volume of data? In the last AMAP survey that we processed, they had a tech that was hired for 40 hours a week, and it took her about 14 months to get through a lot of the data. So we want to try to find a way to speed this up so that we can get results faster. So 2 major ways to tackle huge amounts of data are crowd, so lots of people, or computers. And typically we would think we would want computers to do it because they're fast and accurate, but there are some instances where people are just better than computers. So when are crowds better than computers? collecting data in the real world, creativity, collaboration, and complex reasoning, and then most importantly for our project, making subtle distinctions that computers would miss. So if you've ever signed on to a website and seen one of these where you type in the word and you think, why am I doing this? They're trying to verify that you're not a computer, because human beings can make these subtle visual distinctions that computers would be fooled by. So we need humans' skills to actually go through our photos and to find those tiny, tiny birds and to help us ID them by species. So we decided to go through the crowdsourcing approach. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about citizen science and crowdsourcing, because it's kind of both what we're doing, and I will probably say them interchangeably going forward. But citizen science is basically everyday people contributing to real science. And so the poster child for that is the Cornell eBirds application, which is very inspiring as we start to look forward to our species guide. You can just, any person can download the app, find a bird out there, and then look through the species guide and end up identifying it to species, and then that data gets loaded into their national database. And so they're collecting massive amounts of data. However, the problem with citizen science like this is that the data isn't being collected in any organized fashion per se. People are out there just sort of going where they want, and it's not randomized. So it has its issues, but it generates a ton of data, and that's a really nice working app that I've been enjoying. Crowdsourcing, on the other hand, is just a lot of people working together, everyone doing a little bit to a large end. And this is a photo that I actually had on my cell phone for years. It's my desktop with a bunch of tiny birds carrying a whale. And maybe as we go forward in the world of crowdsourcing with Fish and Wildlife, it can become our new logo. The poster child website for crowdsourcing is Zooniverse, which probably everyone's heard of. Zooniverse has a number of different projects that anyone can just go and upload a project, and these tend to be similar to ours in that they're image analysis projects where people are finding galaxies or penguins and things like that. That heart wasn't supposed to be there, but it's okay. Okay, so citizen science, crowdsourcing, and the Fish and Wildlife mission. It all goes together so well with our mission. By enabling citizen science, we're able to have thousands of eyes and ears on the field tracking our species of concern, thousands of hands in the field battling invasive species. We can do monitoring and inventory of refuge resources. And then, most importantly for us, meaning our specific project, volunteerism saves us money, time, and it can reach all over the country very quickly. And finally, it acts as a second benefit, which is that it acts as outreach. So it engages the community in our mission, which is one of our major goals as an agency. So there are plenty of challenges to any crowdsourcing project. First of all, making science accessible and simple to the everyday person, building the technology, recruiting and retaining volunteers, training volunteers, data quality and potential for sabotage, and then the ethical, legal, and privacy issues involved in working with a lot of people and collecting their user data. For the project design, best practices in crowdsourcing, I was fortunate enough to go to a conference at NASA headquarters, and we talked about best practices in crowdsourcing. So user-friendly and fast, attractive and enjoyable, rewarding, accessible by the computer, and especially phone apps. It's all common sense things. Anything that you yourself would want to work with is what our audience would probably enjoy as well. It's important to have a low barrier to entry, and then you can add increasing investment and reward, such as certain Zooniverse websites will start you without having to log in. You can do a couple photos, and then as you go forward, it'll say, oh, you've done 5 photos, now give us a username if you want us to keep track of you, and things like that. So you can sort of ease people in and then get them hooked. Keep track of the metadata. You know, all of this science doesn't do any good if we don't know what data we're trying to collect and if we're not doing it in an organized fashion. So always keeping in mind what we're trying to get in the end. Oops, and then don't reinvent the wheel. For recruiting volunteers, best practices are to first of all estimate ahead of time how many volunteers will be needed. The crowdsourcing is becoming more and more popular, and little projects are popping up all over the agency and all over the federal government. So I've started to wonder, how are we going to share all of the people out there? So it's good to know how many volunteers will be needed. To get their attention, we can harness social media. For our purposes, especially targeting the recruitment to the right audience. So leveraging passion and expertise and tapping into the nerdy element. And for our project, that would be the bird nerds, which I say affectionately. It's dead silent. Okay. And then finally, connecting the project to the core work of the agency, as always, so you can get people enthusiastic and feeling involved. To retain volunteers, it's important to provide multiple trajectories and opportunities to volunteers. Because you're using such a wide audience, not everyone's a scientist and not everyone is going to want to be as involved. So you can offer them sort of the light version, or they can keep going further and earning higher statuses and more responsibility as they go through. So you can build a hierarchical volunteer model. And then you can add incentives for personal cultivation in the form of offering raffles and prizes to the best volunteers or to people who've reached a certain threshold, increasing status levels and badges. So you can just create these badges like, oh, you've earned like an expert birding, whatever, badge. And then people can feel like they're earning something. It starts to feel more like a game and that they're tracking their progress. We could also make certifications eventually with people, you are a certified photo analyzer. People could put it on their resume potentially, and then we can work on recognition, putting people, featuring them in the news, local news, on our webpage for the Fish and Wildlife Service and things like that. So ways to appreciate our volunteers. And then finally, to always keep in contact and thank them. For training volunteers, it's important to have clear instructions via video or animated tutorial. Try to integrate that into the user experience. Require training and quizzes to proceed, possibly, so that you know that people are all on the same page and that they're all getting on the same skill level. Evaluate volunteer performance and give feedback along the way is really important. And in our beta test, as I'll talk about later, a lot of our volunteers felt that they wanted feedback before going forward. And I've experienced that too when I've gone onto Zooniverse websites, that sometimes I start a project and I don't know if I'm actually doing it right. And then I get discouraged because I don't want to be wasting my time and generating bad data. So making sure that you're telling the volunteers that they're doing a good job, if they are. And then to provide a help desk and support so that they can ask questions and make sure that they are doing it right. Okay, probably the most important is the data quality that you get. It doesn't really do that much good to have a ton of people generating data if the data is garbage. So we need to make sure that the crowdsourcing is augmenting but not replacing science and experts. We kind of have to have an idea before we start of what the right answer is. So to create a pre-analyzed subset of data that can be used as a training set, people can use that as a tutorial, and then also you can work them in randomly as they're going through the photos and the data. You can sort of have randomly placed quizzes that they don't know they're getting, and then we can give them feedback on whether they're doing it correctly. Requiring user registration helps with data quality because it holds people accountable, and then you can actually track who's contributing what. And if you have these performance tracking in place, you can weight the data that's being generated by the user's performance. And you can flag and block low-quality users and saboteurs and things like that. So. And then finally, similar to what we're talking about with the hierarchical system, certain volunteers can ascend to become leaders, reviewers, and power users. And so you can end up having an internal review process where certain volunteers who have really risen through the ranks and have become almost experts at our project can be reviewing other volunteers. And so we end up having data quality worked into the system. And then finally, iterative data collection to make sure that every photo is being reviewed by multiple people so that we can just make sure it's correct. Okay, so our design, we decided to look at in 3 phases. Does anyone still remember what our goal of the project is? Basically, we have the photos. We need to count the birds, figure out which photos have birds, and identify each bird to the species. So we broke it down into 3 phases. Phase 1 is just to identify each photo as bird positive or bird negative. If it has 1 or more birds, it'll get sorted into the bird positive folder, and then it'll continue to go forward through the next 2 phases. And then if it's bird negative, then we'll just not use that photo anymore. Phase 2 is to look through all of the bird positive photos and to find all of the birds. And so for that, we're going to do a count and crop sort of system where you click on them and then a cropped out photo of just that bird or that group of birds is generated. And then those cropped out photos can be used in phase 3. They'll be zoomed in at a maximum resolution, and phase 3 will be to identify each bird down to the species. Phase 3 is by far the most involved phase, and it requires the most expertise of our volunteers. We're going to have to create a species guide, which we're in the early stages of, and I did some work on that this summer, but there's a lot that remains to be done. And then extensive training for the volunteers is going to be really important in that phase. So the challenges specific to our project, and this is, we spent a lot of time this summer sort of going through and figuring out all of the issues that could arise, and there are a lot of details to think through. So first of all, in phase 1, which is just deciding bird positive or bird negative, it's really difficult to see the small birds as you saw in that photo, and a lot of them can be missed. So we need to be very careful of false negatives. It's easier to confirm that a photo has a bird in it than that a photo does not have a bird in it. So there's a bias against small and diving birds because they could not be in the field of view or not visible. The massive photo size that we have, our photos are really large files, and they're really physically large. They're too big to view at maximum resolution on your screen at once. It ends up being a lot of scrolling up and down to see everything. And then we have a huge number of photos, so there's a data storage issue. The transect lines aren't meaningful to our crowd, but cropping the photos so that just the area that we're interested in, that's actually going to be a very time-intensive process, so we have to find a way around that. And then large photos equals slow loading time. So we have a trade-off between what we can present to our crowd and then how much pain they're going to be in as they're waiting for it to upload. So we have to sort of make some hard decisions. In phase 2, when we're counting the birds, it becomes, the major issue is, as we were showing before, we have every bird is going to be in multiple photos. And so we need to reconcile the multiple photos that contain the same birds and find a way to not miss any birds, but also not double, triple, and quadruple count them. And this will actually be helpful. The fact that we have multiple images of each bird can be really helpful as we get to the species identification phase. But in the meantime, we would have to figure out how to track each individual bird, and maybe we could present a page like, here's this bird, you know, in 20 different photos. What species is it? But we need to figure out how to do that, or how to, you know, skip over photos and such. We need to figure out how to reconcile the photo and observer count. So you can see, again, the main purpose of this is to correct and bolster the observer data that we get from the scientists in the planes. So we need to be able to link which photo is shot at the time that the observer made a recording, and then which forward-facing photo that correlates to, and so there's going to be a lot of coordination. It's really not very easy to do. How should we count the birds on the edge of a transect or a photo? So little details like if there's half a bird, are we going to count it as 0 or 1, and therefore our bird's getting double counted or missed? And especially if we end up chopping the huge photos into smaller pieces, that might become a problem because that problem will only multiply. birds move, so as opposed to the buoys that we showed before, not only are they gradually going forward in the photos, but they're flying away and they're diving under and they're moving all over the place, so that makes it even more difficult. And then sometimes the birds overlap and can be hard to distinguish. This is a photo that's actually full of birds. It's one of our better photos, and you probably can't tell, but if I zoom in a bit, I just wanted to show this entire area is covered with quite large birds, and this is a zoomed in area of just the corner. And so just to get an idea of how many there can be in one photo and how much movement there could potentially be, you can start to get an idea of our challenges. Challenges specific to phase 3 are that the distance from the camera to the birds makes them really small and a lot of detail is lost. When you're identifying birds, the plumage changes by the seasons, so you might be able to recognize a king eider easily, but maybe when it's in its a different plumage, they would be more difficult to distinguish from other species or less recognizable. Mixed flocks make things all the more difficult, especially when you have females and juveniles, which are difficult to distinguish between species, and in mixed flocks that just becomes almost impossible. One limitation of the photo analysis and the photo surveys that is lost, that the observers have the benefit of, is that they can see the flight patterns of the birds, and oftentimes that's very helpful to species identification. And so when we're looking at cameras, although we do have that moment in time frozen, we're missing the movement of these birds. And also the position of the bird matters. So when the bird is sitting versus flying, they look very different, and we're going to need to incorporate all of that into the species guide. At the distance that we are filming them, the color is lost, so like yellow beaks or yellow legs or a bit of purple in the wing is going to be lost. Typically you can just see black, white, and then a mixture of black and white. And then the size context is sometimes missing. If you look down at that ocean backdrop, you don't really have an idea of if that speck is a duck or a goose, for instance, and so we're losing some of that the observer scientists do have. And then finally, to identify any single bird to this species, we would need our volunteers to have an extensive knowledge of all of the bird species that could potentially be found in that area. So to build our project, there are a couple of options. Zooniverse has a project builder that you can make your own project easily, but it has a lot of limitations, and one major limitation is that it cannot host photos anywhere close to as large as ours, and ours cannot be shrunk down that small. They do have a custom builder, but I'm assuming that costs money, and who knows. Pybasa, I haven't actually explored, but it's a crowdsourced code to build your own. And then the federal government is rolling out a citizen science toolkit, and it hasn't come out yet, but we look forward to seeing what comes down the pike with that. But we actually are collaborating with Discover Life, which is an amazing website. It was founded in 1998 by John Pickering of the University of Georgia. And he created this site to allow students, biologists, researchers, professionals, and volunteers to all collaborate on science together. A lot of people use it for species identification, and his expertise is in mothing. So he created it for moths, and now we're going to be expanding it to work for our bird identifications. His website has moved far past moths to 1.29 million species. It serves nearly 500 million records and 2 million images to over 800,000 IP addresses monthly. So it's been a growing website and has a lot of presence on the internet. And it contains online tools such as a species ID guide that we can use for our phase 3 and a global mapper. And then finally, it's already an established tool for crowdsourcing moth identifications, and Pick is what we call him. Pick has a ton of expertise in crowdsourcing and has sort of gone through the trial and error of figuring out, do you get a large crowd of non-experts to work through this, or do you get some really good solid volunteers to be a small crowd but they put forth a lot of effort? So he's gone through the trial and error and has been very excellent at advising us. This is the Discover Life homepage, and it's worth exploring, but we are, I'll show you our actual page in a moment, which will be linked off of this. Discover Life offered a lot of solutions to the problems that we were having. So first of all, they're able to store our photos indefinitely at their maximum resolution. So that's amazing, and not just our photos currently, but any photos going forward. It already has security measures in place to work on the security issues that we were talking about. It has a species guide infrastructure that we can adapt for birding. It already has its own audience of avid biologists who could be a ready crowd for us, and it's being custom adapted to our purposes, and we've been collaborating closely with him. Some other things that we came up with during my visit to Georgia, well, we were trying to figure out what to do about this photo resolution imaging issue, and so we ended up deciding that a 50% compression would be sufficient. It actually didn't lose any. The quality loss was in the color of the ocean and not so much the birds, so it was actually fine. And that allows us to load the images much more quickly to the crowd. We offer 2 image sizes, a smaller one and a bigger option, so you can toggle back and forth through them. But of course, both are much smaller than the maximum resolution image, and you'll see more of that as I demo it in a bit. The max resolution is only going to be used for the cropped out images. So when you click on a bird, it's going to crop out the image from the max resolution, and you can actually see it as high as we have. And then finally, we decided to ignore the transect lines for now, and we're going to ignore all of these issues with tracking birds, and we're just telling people, just, is there a bird anywhere in the photo? Where is it? And then later, we're going to use XY coordinates of the photos, and we'll just eliminate the data from outside of the transect. So we'll use computers to help us with that. This is our homepage for our photo analysis project, and I'd like to do a demo now. I'm going to see, 1 second. Well, this is phase 1 when we just did bird and not bird, and these are some forward-facing photos. Basically, you just look around, you click on the photo, and if you see a bird, you click on it, and it's going to automatically source that photo into the bird positive folder, and then it brings up a crop. It's going to be on the right-hand side, not over the photo, but it'll bring up a crop of the thing you clicked on, so you can see if it's actually a bird or not. Can everyone see the bird? It's sort of hidden in the crop, but there is one there. It's easier when you're sitting right in front of your computer, but there's a bird at the very top. It looks like it's flying by the screen, and that one I actually found at the absolute top of the picture. I almost missed it. It was located right there. It was a tiny white speck, and when I clicked on it, I saw that that was a bird. So this would be a bird positive photo, and then you would just move on to the next photo. If there's not a bird present, then you go up to the link that says see no bird, and that was sort of a play on words that was confusing our volunteers, so we changed it to just no bird. So that would be how you sort it to photo negative. Our phase 2 is the count and click type of thing, and so what we do, it's the same idea. You look for a bird. When you click on it, though, this time a yellow square is going to be shown, and that's going to be the same size as the crop. It shows you which area is going to be cropped out. So in doing so, we can make sure that we have every single bird captured, and we decided that for this part, it's okay if there's multiple birds in a photo as long as we capture all of them. We can deal with that later. So we might have like a phase 2B or something before we get to phase 3. Once again, if there's no bird present, if there's none left that aren't circled, then you would go up here to no more birds. So that's the basics of it. I'll try to do an actual demo, but our internet was not working very well earlier. One more thing to talk about is that up here on the right-hand side, once you log in, it keeps your score. So it tells you if you have how many photos you've completed, basically. So you get a point for every photo you go through. And that way you can track your progress as a volunteer. So let me just see if this is working. Should I try it or should I just,
Yeah,
should we go for it?
Go ahead.
Okay. I will say that the internet speed here is not not the way it was at my house or even in the office across the street. Okay, I don't want to deal with this. Okay. Let's save that for the end, if that's okay. Can I just do a demo if we have time? Okay. I have some videos that we can look through, so I'll do that. In our beta test, okay. In our beta test, we started with just the phase 1, and we wanted to get feedback from professionals that are in our area. So we got a team of 8 fish and wildlife and collaborating scientists, including some of our pilot biologists, to give our website a try. We created a training video that they watched first and then asked them to take 30 minutes to work through the website as part of the phase 1 session. And then we had a feedback form so that they could tell us what they thought and give us any ideas that they had. So the results of our feedback from the beta test, first of all, it was accessed from multiple locations, which is what we were hoping for, and a lot of different internet providers. And for the most part, everyone found that the speed was good, except for someone that was on slow Wi-Fi access. They averaged 76.71 photos that they were able to complete in 30 minutes. And then everyone had sort of different preferences for the photo size. Some people chose the smaller, some people chose the larger, and then some people were going back and forth as needed. And then there were no significant differences between the loading time of the smaller versus the larger photos, which is good to know and very encouraging. We asked how their speed, not the loading speed, but their actual speed at performance was improved as they went through the process, the 30 minutes. And some people said that they started to go faster as they had more practice, and then others said that their speed actually decreased because they started to realize that they needed to be more thorough. And so one thing that we'll need to do moving forward is to sort of evaluate this and see what the quality of the data was in our beta test. I asked a number of sort of 1 to 5 scale questions to get feedback. So the video tutorial on a scale of 1 to 5 of helpfulness was rated a 4.875. Workflow of the website was 3.875. Appeal, visual appeal, 3.5. Photo loading time, 3.875. That was brought down by that hotel Wi-Fi. And then ease of classifying photos was 4.0. And then confidence was a 4.25. So obviously we are going to want the ease of classifying photos to be higher than a 4 out of 5, and we're going to want the confidence level to be higher than a 4.25. So that's something that we need to pay attention to going forward. And then the learning curve varied. Some people at a 3 average. Some people felt that, I think particularly our observer biologists do this for a living and see birds from that distance all the time, so they felt that they didn't really have a learning curve. They started out strong, whereas other people did improve as time went on. Some of the comments from our beta testers said that there was, I'm going to skip this because you haven't seen the website. When you click on a bird and it creates a crop for you, if you realize that it's not actually a bird, then you just click on the crop again and it takes you back to the previous photo. But what we have then is you're sort of reviewing the photo all over again. And so one comment was that we should mark the spots that have been checked that we thought were a bird that weren't with an X or something, so that other people or the same person isn't checking the same spot over and over again that isn't actually a bird. So we want to try to figure out how to do that. They said we needed an undo button and that we should offer a black background option to be easier on the eyes and so the birds would stand out more. We need to add a privacy clause and password protect the username, and we're working with our privacy officer now to figure out exactly what we need to do for that. It was a big concern that people were earning points for just completing photos, so that sort of the goal felt like you're trying to go as fast as possible and you're getting rewarded for speed as opposed to accuracy. So we need to change that, and we can't really do that until we integrate that training set in and start quizzing people randomly. But once we do that, we're going to try to have a accuracy score with higher weight than the speed score. There were comments that it didn't seem affiliated enough with the Fish and Wildlife Service and that we should integrate the logo and the mission and explain more clearly exactly how this project is going to help populations of birds and conservation issues. And then in the photos that had choppy waters, those were the most difficult. You're nodding over here, one of our beta testers. In flat waters, you can see a bird stand out very easily. They're really smooth and just pristine, look like, you know, a mirror. And when there's a bird, it really stands out, so you can tell when there's no bird on there. And those are very easy to classify one way or the other. In the choppy photos where there's ocean waves all over the place, you have tons of little shadows that could be birds or not. And you could spend 10 minutes clicking on every little thing trying to find if it's a bird, and oftentimes that's necessary because one of them might be, although most of them aren't. So that was really difficult, and we might, moving forward, need to find a special solution for choppy water photos where we treat them differently. And finally, people asked for a max image option or a magnifier or cutting the photos down, and that would be a potential solution for these choppy water photos. Once again, the problem with that is loading time. Even to load a magnifier that would sort of give you the max resolution over the smaller image requires the entire image to be uploaded, and so we're going to have to wait on that lag. So we'll try to find a way to handle that. During our beta test, as we were launching it, an email went out at 5 o'clock Thursday, August 13th, and it was just sent to the Maryland Birding Listserv, which was about 1,300 people, and the USGS and associated researchers. And within 45 hours, 100 visitors came to our site and went through 13,000 photos, exhausting our entire first batch that we had uploaded. And this again was phase 1, so they were just saying bird, no bird. They averaged about 65 photos per person per day, which makes me think they were each on there about half an hour on average. And then they were so enthusiastic that we didn't want to lose their attention and their enthusiasm, so we loaded a bunch more photos and we actually launched phase 2 with the clicking on each bird. So we actually got more than we expected. The lessons learned from the crowd beta test is that there's an eager audience excited about this project, and this project has a ton of potential to reach our audience, and people really enjoyed it. We got about a 5% response rate to that one message, so that can give us an idea of what our outreach efforts are going to have to be. Since at some point we had to upload phase 2, the analysis with everybody total as they were going through phase 1 and phase 2 of all of the photos we uploaded, 16,847 photos were completed through both phase 1 and phase 2 in 18 days by 100 people. So that comes out to 8.2 photos totally processed per person per day, not phase 3, not bird identification, but the first 2. So we can estimate that to get through the 160,000 photos that it took our tech 14 months to do, it would take 650 people about 1 month, but keeping in mind that that's not taking into consideration the other parts of the project that we still haven't gotten to, like the challenges with multiple birds and the bird ID. We also found sort of a happy discovery, I think, is that when we had 100 people on and they were all clicking furiously, we found that it crashed the system. And so PIC was able to already correct that problem, and so there's a backup system in place and it's working great. But that was great that we had the chance to see that problem. So moving forward, the potential crowds that we could try to harness for this project, phase 1 and 2 are really easy. Anyone can spot a bird and count a bird. So that could appeal to a general audience. And so we could use all of the Discover Life users, naturalists in general, students, and the general public. Obviously for phase 3, it's going to be more difficult, and we're going to require birding experts and hobbyists. So we're thinking of reaching out to the state birding listservs, Ducks Unlimited, the Audubon Society, Cornell Ornithology, Refuge Volunteers, and Fish and Wildlife Service migratory bird employees, if you guys don't have enough to do already. And then any other suggestions you have, we'd be happy to take. The next steps are to evaluate the data quality from the beta test. So we need to see how many of these people, we can look at things like how fast did a person go through a certain number of photos, and then what was their accuracy. We can look at how many times did they click on something that turned out not to be a bird. So in other words, how many things were they checking and being careful of, and does that increase accuracy, or are the people who are clicking through quickly just better at it but equally accurate? So we can start to have an idea of that. We can also compare our data from our 8 specialists and compare that to the general population that when that email went out to the 100 users. So we can sort of see if there's a difference in quality there. There are 3 high school students interested in working with us on this, and so we're hoping that they can help us go through and sort of make an answer key for a number of our photos that we can use going forward. We also need to create the appreciation program, set it in place to retain volunteers so that before we launch, we're ready to retain people and to really be appreciating them and have everything ready to go. We want to make all the changes that I discussed based on the feedback from our beta test. We need to integrate the training set and then adjust the score calculations. We need to figure out an approach to replicate photos because there may not be any reason to have everyone going through every single photo. Maybe we can cut the time in by 10 by skipping over photos without losing data. So we'll have to take a look at that. And then for phase 3, there's a ton of work that needs to be done. We need to develop a species guide and the phase 3 interface, and then get into the training modules and everything. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is the species guide. When I first came on, that's what we thought I was going to be working on this summer. We thought that was the low-hanging fruit, but the more we looked into it, we realized that it was a very involved process, and so that's going to be more of a future project. What we did work on so far is I created a species list by compiling the AMAPS species and the Puget Sound species from those surveys in the past. Any species that was observed, I compiled into a list, and then we went through and sort of selected out the most abundant species from those surveys, and also species of concern and species of interest based on our funding and what we're looking for our research. We started to create a photo library from each species. Tim Bowman contributed a number of pictures from his various photographers that we were able to upload to Discover Life and start to load into the species guide. And then we also had our own collection of some photos, and then Discover Life has a number of photos too. So I went through and looked at what we have and what we're missing. And so moving forward, that's going to be quite a large project. For each species, we'll need a picture of male, female, juvenile, resting, and flying from an aerial point of view, and then also close-ups if possible, and then also the varied plumage from different times of the year. So it's going to be quite in-depth. Then once we have all of that, we can work on creating sorting categories in the guide. The guide is set up so that you can sort by wing color or any category you want, you can sort that out. So if you see a blackbird, you can click on black and it'll eliminate everything else. So we'll have to create that system. And then finally, we'll want to integrate species quizzes and have people earning badges so we can start introducing the different species identification skills early on in phase 1 and 2 for our general volunteers, and then maybe they'll have some enthusiasm and sort of get hooked and want to move forward with us into the later phases. So that's it. Should I take a moment of a video, or?
Get it running. You don't have
Okay.
too much time if people want to ask questions.
Okay, and I can even put it on in the background while people ask
I think it's
questions.
worth it.
Yeah. I have two videos. One's for phase 1 and one's for phase. So this is the website, and if you you can see on the homepage that magnifier, you can just move your mouse over and it shows you where the birds are. So right off the bat, we're showing everybody how small the birds are and what they really look like at max. And then you click on the Get Going link, and it takes you to the login. And we started with people logging in with their full names and then their work email address, and we're going to change that to the username. So that we don't deal with privacy issues. Now when you go in, you can see it's very slight, but there's a score in the upper right-hand corner in red. And what I'm doing is just scanning through with my eyes, looking through the whole photo, and I see something that I think is a bird, and I'm considering clicking on it. And if I think there's no bird, then I would click up there where it says no bird. Okay, so that tiny little speck is a potential bird, so I'm clicking on that, and it's sorting that photo, that previous photo, into the bird positive folder. And on the right is the cropped out image. So you can see that that is a bird, and that was a correct classification. And what we've got is on the left-hand side, in the meantime, the next image has already been loaded, so that the process is really fast. But one of the feedback that we got from volunteers is that it was also really confusing to be presented with the next photo. So that's something that we're also going to change. That was me clicking on a tiny thing in that photo. I think it turned out not to be a bird. So we can see over here we have a photo. The crop on the right, it's just a blob. It's not a bird. So if we click on it again, it undoes that classification of it being a bird positive and takes us back to the photo. And here is where we would want that X over that spot that we checked. And so now I'm just going through this photo and checking different spots. One at a time, they're going to get loaded. Okay, no, that's not a bird. Go back to the photo again. So you can see how the process works. And because this is slightly choppy waters and the birds are not coming up that clearly, this takes a little bit of time. So I decided to toggle to the bigger image. When you view the bigger image, you have to scroll up and down in order to see the whole thing. And then I think I decided at that point, see, there's no bird now that I've looked at it. And so now it's getting sorted, and the next one was presented. That was phase 1, and then phase 2 was just clicking on the birds, really similar.
Is there audio on those videos?
I did have an audio on the training video, but I don't have an audio on this, because I cut it up from the training video. Because by the time I made it, phase 1 was not available online anymore. So, but I could get you whatever you need. I have a ton of narration.
No, I was just curious for the end users when they see it.
Oh, okay. This isn't the video that they would see. This is for my presentation. The training video that they would see would be similar to what the beta testers saw, but I do want to make it a little shorter, snappier, and higher. The program I used was not very good to make that video, so I need to find a different program that works better. Yeah. Any questions?
Questions?
Yeah.
Do you think it's worth, it might be worth rewarding people for the amount of time that they spent, like the total hours?
Yeah.
That could be potentially a perverse incentive, but like it would also, reward people for saying, you know what, some of these photos are harder than others, and we really appreciate your thoroughness. And,
Yeah, I like that.
So, you mentioned the possibility of false negatives,
Mhm.
it's hard to find them all, but there are modeling approaches you can use to estimate that, double observer methods, potentially occupancy modeling. So I don't know if that's something that's come up.
That's over my head, but
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the idea would be you would have more than one person look at a sample of the photos, and you could get some estimate of, the proportion that are zeros and people's, adjust for people's skills, the same way that you would with an observer situation or something, yeah.
We do have some problems with one limitation of Discover Life as it is at the moment is that we have trouble with the iterative aspect because once you classify a photo as something, it gets sorted into a folder. So we have had trouble allowing multiple people to analyze the same image, and I don't know if that's what you were getting at, but that data would be helpful.
Right, yeah, I mean, so with the double observer, you would have two different people
Mm-hmm.
with the same photo, and if detection probability is really high, they should both be getting the same result. And if detection probability is low, you'll be getting different results from these two people. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you get a low detection probability, then at a minimum, you're aware that there's a low detection probability.
Right.
And in fact, you can use that to estimate how many are being missed. Yeah, that's the type of process I'm thinking about. And you could also, you mentioned how birds might not be available because they're underwater,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. You could probably come up, especially when you have a series of photos, right? If a bird's under for 1 minute and it pops back up, like if you compared the two sequential photos, you could probably account for some of that.
Yeah, and I was going to say we weren't able to do the iterative thing on the beta test, but we did have all the photos in a row. Many of them are basically duplicates of the same group of birds. So we do have that we could compare, or maybe we could have those students look at multiple photos and see.
Sorry, but
Mm-hmm.
like just if you wanted to have two people look at one photo,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is just off the top of my head, but you just, right, you've got your database of photos, and you just call all of, so you've got 10,000 photos, you just add a .a to all of them, copy that.
Yeah.
These are .b, and I don't know, you just put them in random order, and probably most of the time it'll be two different individuals, but even if it's one individual gets the same photo on Monday, and then they come back
Right.
on Tuesday, they're still looking at it with a different eye, so that's legitimate.
Yeah.
There's an issue of photo size. I mean, these are like terabytes of data for not even that many photos. So we do run into a problem of like how much server space do we have to duplicate it. Like just storing all our photos once is a lot of work, and then we want to save the maximum photos plus the reduced photos, that sort of thing. So to sort of duplicate the data set is maybe not the most elegant solution to that problem, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. We need something. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can do those with those types of methods. You don't have to you don't have to have two observers on every photo in the data set. You could just do 10% of the data set.
Yeah, I mean, we could do something where we have people go through the ones that are listed as bird negative and say, earn 100 points if you can find a bird in this photo, something like that. I mean, and people can, so there's options for, re-reviewing things that are sorted out as bird negative. And then we did tell our volunteers false positives at early stages are better than false negatives because we don't want to lose the birds. But later on when we start to identify them, if we realize, okay, that's a blob, not a bird, I mean, we'll handle that later. But yeah, I mean, I agree. We need to figure some things out, and those suggestions I think they're good. So.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues with the crowd is we're kind of we're not more interested, but I shouldn't even point it out, the false negatives are a concern. Those are the things people are going to be less interested in looking at.
Right.
So you don't want to abuse your crowd by making it so boring that they then don't want to participate anymore. So it's kind of a balance on how much you want to expose them to negative images or something like that.
I'm sure the Discover Life folks probably have a whole bunch of algorithms already written where you could you could take like a subsample of your bird negative photos and just work them into your next, the next queue somehow.
Mm-hmm.
My guess is they probably already have other people's projects, they probably already got those kinds of algorithms written perhaps.
I don't know if they do because they tend to have close-ups of moths,
Oh, I see.
and so our project is sort of unique in that we're looking at tiny specks over a huge area. But I mean, one thing maybe we could do is on the choppy water, like maybe we could mark photos that these are difficult to identify. Like, okay, no bird, maybe another option, maybe no bird, and those could go separately, and maybe they could be chopped up into smaller photos that could be then presented at maximum resolution to a different volunteer. I mean, there's a lot of things, and that's why, you know, to keep in mind, and I didn't say it, we're at the very early stages, and what we've built is, yeah, I mean, we're just sort of dipping our toe into this and figuring out all of the different issues, so.
So are there, yeah, go ahead, folks on the phone who want to ask a question.
So Ryan Richmond, Fish and Wildlife Service. The folks who fly and do discounts here, what were their sort of impressions of looking at photos versus the lots of information not having movement? Was that an issue? Did you feel like they were, you know, not able to identify anything because they were missing that? Hear any of the results back from the website?
So is the question, oh.
Okay, so there were two questions. The first question was, the people who were experienced in the airplane, did they comment on the difficulty or the distinction of looking at birds on photos versus when they have motion associated with them? And then the second one was, were we able to, you faded out there a little bit, Orion, but were we able to compare what we're getting from these photo surveys to the observers? Is that correct? Yeah, data from the observers.
I didn't see that in the comments, but can we put Tim Jones on the spot? No.
I mean, I think it's harder from the photos, personally.
You do?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting.
Well, and that gets to your second question, I think, Orion, about the observer data. No, Shani hasn't looked at the observer data yet, and we do have the observer data for this set of photos from Joe and Don in Washington, and so that would be, you know, once we get the data, they had I mean, this is kind of a neat set of data because this particular set of photos, they had a tech go through all of them. So we have her, kind of what she found, although it's not every photo, it was kind of photos associated with the yellow line that Shani showed at the first thing. So, but for a set of those photos, we know what she saw. She went through most all the photos, I don't think all of them. And then we have the observer, two observers information, and then we'll have the crowd as well. So that'll give us a really rich data set too. And then, you know, some students and maybe additional crowd people going through these photos. So it really is sort of a test case.
Do you find the ideas more difficult, or even just spotting the birds is more difficult?
Both.
Really? Okay.
And that, the photos you were showing,
Yeah.
they used to call choppy.
Yeah.
That's common for the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, it's true. They're even it's the small waves that have the issues because they look like tiny little shadows. Yeah.
But it gets worse when they get bigger.
Yeah, I haven't. Oh, really? I haven't seen that many with really choppy waters, at least from that set.
Because that study wasn't flown when there was wind over.
Okay.
When basically it was flown in calm weather.
So other questions from the peanut gallery on the phone?
Yeah, hey, this is Tim. My question is, one, do you know who the users are through diagnostics or anything? Do you have any idea who's actually participating in this?
Do you want to answer that? Well, we know the people we asked to do it, so, but no, the people since we need to set up that privacy settings and that sort of thing, so we're not supposed to, so Pick sent us the data with the user ID stripped from that. He uses email in order to uniquely identify people, so he requests that so that he can have a unique ID on people, but the idea is that their information is private. So, I mean, that's something one would potentially want to build in, is ask them some demographic information or ask them if they're willing to share that so that we could gain some additional information. I mean, I don't think most people participating, you know, it's not private information that
Yeah.
they're providing us. So I think people would be willing to share information about themselves, probably, but we haven't built that in yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of the typical username, password, and enter your personal information that goes into the Discover Life database, but isn't shown to but only your username is shown on the scoreboards, I think is probably the route we should go.
Okay, I'm thinking about something like Google Diagnostics and something that might just look at, you know, are these users in the U.S., are they in other countries, or where? It'd be interesting to look at.
Well, PIC does record the IP address, and that's one way he can check to see that the person who's logged in is the person they say, you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
you know, there's always, with these kind of things, potential for sabotage. So if someone knows your email address, you know, they could log in as you know, and so he can kind of check. You know, I don't know how much he does that, but, you know, so there is the IP address which would get at the U.S. versus international or regional things or so on. So yeah, I think that's stuff. I mean, one of the things that we've talked about is, you know, and I think Shani mentioned in her presentation, are we building a system that we want to be for the general public? We could also be building a platform that we want to be for a more specialized audience, like maybe even within the agency, you know, as a way to have people participate in our survey programs. And those we would probably build different information about users. You know, if it's all Fish and Wildlife Service people, we know them, and, you know, it's part of their job, and so we would maybe collect different demographic and user information than if we're trying to engage the general public or something, so.
Thanks. Hey, one more question too, or one more comment, I guess. Talked about the area of the photos that were outside the transect area, and there's a way in Photoshop you can basically delete those unnecessary pixels, crop it out, and you can run it, well, essentially you set up a macro and run it as a batch job. It doesn't require individual photo manipulation. So it's been a while since I've done it, but I can talk to you about that later, and it might be something you want to consider. It would drop file sizes quite a bit.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Yeah.
Emily, this is Don.
Yeah, go ahead, Don.
I thought it was a very interesting presentation. One comment I had was when our technician went through the photos that Joe and our folks took, it was helpful. They projected them on a screen, so, you know, a computer screen can be kind of difficult to spot things. One suggestion might be to have folks that are looking at these, you know, there's so many big screen TVs out there now, and capability to hook in your computers into the big screen TVs to allow, you know, better resolution and, you know, picking out the images if they can be enlarged quite a bit. So that's what we found we had to do, is project them on a screen versus having the technician look on the computer screen. So they would project them on through a regular projector.
Yeah, well, that's good advice,
didn't
maybe
think about
even in
that.
the tutorial piece or something, that you put that in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just one technique to help out picking out these small birds, especially on the choppy water. You know, they're difficult.
Are you
Alan,
gonna get more funding from the Fish and Wildlife Service?
we do have some money, thanks to the CDUC joint venture, to do a little bit more work, and we're getting some money from the AMAPS program to do some more work. So, but we don't have a big chunk of money. And then I think we've been talking a little bit with BOEM, because, you know, they're very interested in these photo surveys, and they have this problem that they get the photos, but they don't have a way to get the information off the photos. So they would be a really great source for.
Yeah, they have lots of money.
Yeah, and they're very excited about this project, and I probably screwed up by not sending that to David Bigger.
No, I sent it
You
to him,
did?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And he couldn't be on, but I think we'll send him. Shani's also gonna have a written report that kind of summarizes the information in her presentation. So if anyone's interested in it, let us know. And
Yes.
Okay, send it on to you, and then we'll have the idea to send it on to the folks who we invited, you know, or other people are interested in being here. So. Other folks on the phone? Okay, well, thanks. Great job.
Thank you.